Hi, I'm Jonathan Roberts, and this is Real Estate, where we look back at some of the interesting property news in the past week. And this episode is going to be slightly different because we are focusing solely on the much discussed Budget 2018. And to talk to us about this topic, we have two guests and friends of Star Property, IQI Chief Economist Shan Said and Propedia Consultant Founder Vicky How. Welcome to the show. Firstly, the Budget 2018 is a 218 billion ringgit budget with the theme Prosper with Inclusive Economy, and it certainly is a very rakyat-centric budget with many winners involved, namely middle-income taxpayers, civil servants, student loan dodgers, and even women in the workplace. So there will be huge spendings as well from the government on venture capital, infrastructure, and even healthcare. As a result, the government expects to see much growth in private investments for the year of 2018. What are your general thoughts, Shan, on the budget 2018? I know you made many predictions and you were spot on that, but what should Malaysians pay attention to?
I think it's a very balanced budget. If I were to look at it from a bigger picture, it's a very growth oriented, confidence driven, and people's friendly budget. It has got everything for everyone. The government has tried to maintain a very growth centric budget, taking into account the global economy is still very volatile. We have tumultuous times in advanced economies, but even in those times, the government has come up with something very good for rakyat, for people. The focus is on infrastructure. The focus is on education. As you know, countries that have developed or they have progressed faster are the ones that have invested heavily in education.
Right.
And as I said, I was speaking at Securities Commission. If any country wants to change her economic destiny, female education is the key.
Yeah.
And female education has direct correlation with GDP growth. Secondly, infrastructure. I was 2 weeks back, I was attending World Bank and IMF annual meeting, and they were focused on two things. One is Belt and Road, and secondly on infrastructure. And Sir Richard Branson was there, and he spoke very eloquently about how sustainable infrastructure can spur GDP growth for many economy. So overall, if I were to look at Malaysian budget at a macro perspective, I would say it's a very balanced one.
Right. And Vicky, you described the budget as something almost too good to be true. Why?
Right.
What about the budget most excites you?
Okay, this time the budget, I'm actually very surprised. It's actually very good budget. It actually help out on the income, people's income, and also like what Shan has mentioned, is a huge investment into education.
Yep.
A lot of people from our neighbor countries, such as Cambodia, Indonesia,
Right.
Also Myanmar, and also Thailand, they actually came to Malaysia to do their studies. When government decide to improvise the education in Malaysia, it can actually attract more of the foreigner to study in Malaysia. When foreigners study in Malaysia, it means that they will also create some investment here and stay for a long term. And the second things that I will look at it is the infrastructure. Recently we had a highway that is connected from KL to Rawang. That is an amazing highway. So I'm really proud when I look at the highway. So when infrastructure improve, look at our countries in some other countries like Thailand, they have improved so much on their infrastructure that makes their economy goes up very fast. It also attract people to come over to Malaysia to have a look at what is Malaysia, what is in Malaysia. Yeah. Overall, I think it is very good. Too good to be true, because our country main income is from tax. But if we were to reduce the taxes, there also will be alarm to ask that how can this whole thing sustained. So this is a query that whether this budget could be sustainable or not. Otherwise, the whole budget is really attractive and very good for the rakyat.
And for you, Shan, do you see how do you look at Malaysia next year in terms of economic Would there be recovery or fast growth? How do you see?
At IQI, we have already said that Malaysia is part of a confidence-driven economy. There are four right now. You have Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. These are the four economies in ASEAN which will be confidence-driven for the next 5 to 10 years. And I foresee Malaysia's GDP for the next 3 to 5 years between 4.8 and 5.2. What the government has done, they have brought down the taxes for the middle class, which is very good, but at the same time they have focused on increasing the GDP size. So what happens is when you increase the GDP size, people try to spend more, they save more, and they invest more. So when people are spending, the businesses are investing, the government indirectly get more taxes. So when they say how to increase tax to GDP ratio, it's very simple. You increase the GDP size. So once you increase the GDP size, your tax to GDP ratio automatically grows. So I think the government has played her cards very strategically, taking into account the overall ASEAN economy. You look at some of the economies are going down, but Malaysia is still on the upside because Malaysia is part of Belt and Road. So if you're part of Belt and Road like Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, you will stay relevant for the next 10 to 15 years. If you're not,
that's good
luck.
news for us. And
that is
one of the main focuses on budget is also accelerating growth of the fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy. Can you tell us more about this initiative and how it's going to impact Malaysia?
The other day I posted something on LinkedIn and Facebook. I said, whoever will embrace technology will move faster. Right. So for global investors, why Malaysia is on the global investors radar? Now, firstly, because of strategic geography that Malaysia has. You can't change your geography. You can't say, oh, we don't like staying over here with Singapore. We want to go to France and we want to hold the whole country next to Luxembourg or Liechtenstein. You can't do that. So Malaysia's geography is very important. Secondly, global investors, they want if the government has got money, whether the government is tech savvy, people are tech savvy. So wherever people are technology savvy, wherever the governments are tech savvy, investors, they would like to park their funds in that country.
And now zeroing into the property market, 2.2 billion has been allocated for housing, of which 1.5 billion will be for Prima housing. So we are expecting to see 210,000 units roll out, priced at very affordable, RM 250,000. And more than that, the government has finally listened to the developers' call, to extend the step-up financing scheme to private developers. For the benefit of the audience, can you explain what is this step-up financing? How does it work, and is this move going to help the public?
Okay, let's talk about the Prima first. I think the Prima is very good steps to enhance the beneficial of the rakyat. Because we are actually under supply of houses. If you look at our census NAPIC and also the population, we are definitely in deficit of houses. But a lot of people are not able to afford a housing. But also, I will also urge that people do not abuse this facility given by the government.
In what sense?
People that can afford. They will do some documentation so that they can get the Prima houses.
Right.
The Prima houses also help out a lot. Another reason why people are nowadays not buying houses is also because of their profile and financing. Financing has been very difficult in the last few years. Plus the fact that PTPTN are able to be on secrecy, and a lot of people are not able to pay off PTPTN, they are not able to buy a house. Either it's their behavior not wanting to pay off the PTPTN, or they cannot afford it. Okay, but if they cannot afford it, they can't afford to buy a house anyway. And by having the government to reduce the PTPTN loan discount and helping out to resolve their PTPTN loan so that their secrets can be beautified. You won't see like 50 over, some secrets you can see 50 over, 20 over months not being paid. So if all this can be cleared, more and more youngsters are able to buy a house. That could help. By helping the developer to finance them to develop the property, I think it's a good news, provided they are actually doing it on the Prima housing. and not the luxury property.
Yep.
I actually went to check on the KPKT website to look at how many developers are blacklisted, and there are huge amount of developers are actually blacklisted. If all the developers are actually abusing this facility given by the government to build high-end condos, I think this will be taking the money from the governments to do something taking our money to do something to enhance their profit. So that is my
your take. And there's a lot of focus on the rental market as well. 50% tax exemption on rental income for residential properties, and this is the first time in 60 years actually. And do you foresee a significant change in the rental market for next year?
I think the market dynamics will change dramatically next year. The government has given clear signals with Prima coming into the play that government wants housing market to be on the upsurge, and private sector will definitely take a huge signal from this investment. And I think overall, I think it's good for the market. People will continue to have a long-term view. Plus, the short-term rental market is becoming very hot. So you have Airbnb and others coming into the market. So we see at IQI a lot of interest in the short-term rentals, and that market will continue to stay on the global investors' radar.
What are your thoughts on this tax exemption?
This is really, I think this one really helps a lot of landlords. For the past 2 years, there is influx of completed property at the same time. Some of the developments are thousands over units in one development, and some of it are mega townships. When it's all completed at the same time, the market is flooded with all the properties, and a lot of landlords that assume that by 3 years down the road, when the property is completed, they are able to rent it out or either sell it off. However, because of the softened market these few years, they are not able to do that. And the landlords has been suffering in overgearing by having to pay their installment every month by not able to renting out their property. So some landlord actually cut the losses by renting out giving a deep discount in the rental. So if having said that, if they are giving a deep discount in the rental, meaning that they already suffer, if they were to pay the income tax again, they have to suffer again. So giving 50% discount, it actually helps them out a lot. Plus the fact that actually past few years I have seen a lot of landlords, they are full-time investor. That means they don't have a fixed income, they are solely relying on their rental. All this can actually ease their burden. Plus the fact that if you have, let's say you have 120,000 of rental, okay, and that's 50% off, so will be cut down to 60%. So if you are a full-time investor, this 60% taxable, it will be in the medium brackets. So you will be reduced by 2% again. Okay. Looking another way, if you are having an investment holding company that is actually taxable, and you are actually receiving about 400,000, 400,000, so you're actually taxable at 20%. I'm sorry, 200,000. I mean 50%, taxable at 50%, and that also reduces your GST and income tax. So this helps a lot of landlords during this difficulties time. If these things will not come into the picture right now, I mean, if the government do not address this problem, in the future there will be more and more auction cases coming up in the market. So I think it will be healthy to overall the economy.
Interestingly, Property Management Valuation Estate Agency Surveying, PMVS, said that the 50% tax exemption should be directed towards the tenants who are in greater need of government assistance instead of rewarding landlords. This is something I read yesterday from the media. And what are your thoughts towards this statement? Do they have a point, or?
Okay, in many years down the road, we name landlord as the rich person, right? They have the money to buy property. Obviously, they are rich, but right now that's not the case anymore. in fact, this is a tenant market. It's not a landlord market. So we should help those who are actually in need. I think tenants, most of the tenants have plenty of choices where they want to rent their property. And most of the tenants are actually richer than the landlord right now, because the installment they are paying probably is 2,000 over ringgit plus the maintenance fees. It can come up to a yearly of 2,500 to 3,000 for 500,000 condominium. But the landlord probably will be only paying 1,000 ringgit, and they have surplus of plenty surplus in their disposable income. Yeah. So I think this is, to me, I will help out the landlord more than the tenant.
In terms of spending on infrastructure, there's huge focus from the government in regards to infrastructure. How do you see, what would the direct impact be on the property market in years to come?
I think more and more construction is happening with infrastructure. A lot of labor has been used, so economically the impact is higher. So one of my, as I shared with you earlier, one of my Nobel laureate professors from University of Chicago, Robert Fogel, wrote a paper in 1964 where he said how infrastructure has direct correlation with GDP growth. So I think government is in line what the global players are doing, like China, India, Turkey, Russia. So everybody is so obsessed with infrastructure that, so it boils down to whether the governments have got money or not. So investors would like to go into that country where governments have got money, where they have got money to spend on infrastructure. But if you don't have money, then you have situations like Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain, where people are running away because the governments, they don't have money. So I think it's a good strategic intent of the government, to continue to invest in infrastructure. And with Belt and Road, Malaysia will be able to attract $25 to $30 billion from China alone. And if you see the total quantum of Belt and Road is $1.4 trillion. And ASEAN alone will receive between $500 to $600 billion of investment.
And with this infrastructure in place and improvements in public transportation, this question can be directed to both of you. Would you see more young professionals finally moving out of the city? Because it's a natural phenomenon. Like if you talk about even the bigger cities in the world, a lot of people work in the city center, but they live far out where the cost of living is lower, and houses are also more affordable. But in Malaysia, there's a bit of a reluctance sometimes when you can move out to, say, Seremban, for instance, and get a very decent landed property there, but be afraid of travel time and stuff like that. Would you see these changes coming?
I say it will be gradually, not in a split of time, but it's gradually. Because you have to know that in many other countries, like London or Australia, people use public transport. When I was in overseas, we don't mind walking for 1 km. The weather is nice, cozy, breeze and all that. You like to walk. But in such a hot sunny day, you find it's troublesome to walk. If they were to invest in the infrastructure, they also have to invest in the idea that people would like to walk. For example, shaded area, sky bridge to cross the roads and all that. Safety is very important, and also to take into account that this infrastructure, although there is all LRT and MRT coming up, people are still relying on the car because they already get used to the car. It will have to take some time for them to get used to having LRT stations.
How do you think the government can encourage this change? Because right now, if you talk about prices alone, the price is more or less the same for me to take the train instead of driving, So like you say, it requires a cultural change as well. How can the government incentivize people to make the right decision? Because public transportation is better for the country, it's better for the environment as well. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think engagement strategy with key stakeholders is the key. Communication with all the key stakeholders. If I were to look at KL infrastructure, especially the MRTs and the LRTs, I have spent 5 years in US. I can tell you KL public transport system is much better than Chicago. So you know, when I compare Chicago and KL, I would rather prefer staying in KL, where you know the MRTs and the LRTs they come on time. You know, everything is very efficient as compared to Chicago, where the infrastructure is going down. Or cities like Detroit, you know, the infrastructure is crumbling. You know, it's totally dilapidated. So I think what government can do, they can have an engagement strategy with all stakeholders. They can have more workshops and seminars, you know, to encourage people to live outside the city, because everybody cannot stay around KLCC area. KLCC area is a very short area. You have limited space, and population is growing. When I moved from Chicago to KL in December 2011, Malaysia's population was 29 million. And as of today, Malaysia's population is 32.1 million. So over a period of 6 years, the population has gone up. So I think land is limited, population is growing, property prices will continue to go up. And at IQI, we have been sharing with our valued and sophisticated investors, in difficult time, the only fixed asset that goes up is land, and we are dealing with that.
For you?
Well, the reason why the cost of taking a LRT or MRT or even a bus is very high in cost is because less people taking it. So they have to take into the account they need to maintain the LRT and MRT. So I think awareness is the thing.
But wouldn't it make sense if they lower their pricing strategy, and it actually, because if it would drop my expenditure cost to about 50%, for instance, let's say I drive 300 ringgit petrol and stuff like that. If I could lower it to 150, at least it entices me to take public transportation. If I see that it's more or less the same, or maybe just 20 ringgit cheaper a month, it's not convincing. And I think if they lower their prices, do you think that more people will follow suit?
But you see, right now all the stations are not completed. So eventually you still have to take it on your car. So if the government wants to encourage people to take on the public transport, they have to create awareness. Okay, they have to find a way that how can they get from one stop to another stop. By doing that, they have to keep expanding their LRT and MRT stations. Just like Singapore, it's so convenient. You just have to walk like less than 500 meters, there's another stop. So they have to do it in such a way that it's so convenient for the rest of the people. So when more and more people using the LRT or MRT, they can reduce the price because they will split the cost among all the people who use it. So by then, the government has to create awareness. And I think the 50% has to go on. It will run to deficit, but at least it keep people notice that the benefit of having the public transport. And also they have to give more benefit on the LRT. I think educating them also a must. I find that a lot of people are vandalizing the LRT station, even though just first week of opening. I think education, to educate them to be civilized. We are a developing country. We got to behave like a developing country. It's also our responsibility to take care of the public items.
So down to the crux of the matter, would you put your money into properties that is outside the city center right now? Are you bullish on?
Yes, I am. I have been investing outside the city all the while, because I find that the city has raised to a certain period of time. Okay, although it will still go up, it will go up at I would say a slower rate. Okay, but outside the city, there's so much room for potential development. Okay, there will be infrastructure, there will be transportation, there will also be some other master plan that coming up. So there's plenty of place and rooms for development, and the price is so much cheaper. I could be double or triple the price in 10 years down the road. But if I were to put my money in the city center right now, the room to grow is very small. Because the affordability has gone down.
So lastly, do you think that the government has done enough in terms of addressing many of the concerns in regards to the property market? Of course, many has talked, like PEPs, for instance, have talked about the mismatch between supply and demand, and oversupply of properties in certain segments, I mean mainly commercial, which they talk about. And do you think the government would you have liked to see the government implement different measures? Both of you, yeah.
I think the government has done enough to send a signal to the market.
Right.
It is not the responsibility of the government to drive the housing market. Government has got nothing to do. It is always the private sector that creates housing market, globally speaking.
Right.
It is always the private sector that creates job. It is always the private sector that creates productivity. So to throw everything on the government, that government has to do things, you have to be independent. Let's face this fact, whether we like it or not. Government cannot do everything. Government can provide you a roadmap, can provide you economic framework so that you can work accordingly. And the private sector in Malaysia, they're quite aggressive and they're willing to take on new challenges. So the government has done enough, in terms of housing. Yes, they're trying their bit, but I think the private sector, it has to take a lead. There's a threshold of every asset and every valuation. That's why what she is saying, it absolutely correct, that in city center the growth is very negligible now because the valuation has touched this threshold. But the valuations are very high in terms of at the outskirts of the city. So more and more people are moving towards outskirts of the city. That's where the valuations are very attractive, and it will continue to go up.
Right. For you, Vicky?
For me, I agree with Shan on that. Government has done a lot. I went to Singapore the past few weeks ago, and there was also Singaporean asked, why is the government not reducing the threshold so that the Singaporean can buy the property?
Right.
I find this hilarious, and at the same time, I find that our government has done so much. I mean, it's only 1 million ringgit compared to any other country. And government has made this property market so attractive that if the foreigner don't buy in Malaysia, where else can they buy?
Yeah.
We are the cheapest property in the whole Asia. We have given foreigner the chance to own a landed property by strata title.
Yeah.
We also allowed them to have freehold property. Where else in the world that you can own such a property like that? But having said that, the developer also, I think the developer has to bear in mind that they have to come from contribution rather than just develop for the sake of developing.
Yeah.
Because I see that many development has next to it has got thousands and thousands of developments. You are fighting with each other. Rather than fighting with each other, I think you can build something else that enhance the whole market. For example, you can build a hospital that will benefit both developments, or a school that both can generate profit. I mean, as a developer, it's not necessary you have to build houses or commercial. No matter how creative you are right now, you are still building a property to sell, just to sell. I think there are also creativity in creating sustainability in the development.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much, Shansai and Vicky. Sadly, we have reached the end of the reel. Do like our Facebook page, starproperty.my, to keep up with all things real. I'm Jonathan Roberts. See you next time.